Ever since I was young, my parents have always shown favoritism towards my sister. On the day of my college entrance exam, they even allowed my sister to prevent me from attending. After I failed, I couldn't secure a job and found myself at the mercy of my sister. It wasn't until my sister drove me to the brink of death that I discovered I wasn't their biological child. If I had a second chance, I would never repeat the same mistakes. I was given that chance, as I was reborn on the night before the college entrance exam. In my previous life, I woke up and realized my sister Daphne had locked me in a room. No matter what I tried, I couldn't escape. My parents passed by, ignoring my desperate cries for help. As a result, I missed the exam, even though I was regularly in the top 5 of my class. Meanwhile, Daphne was an art student with mediocre grades. Yet she trapped me, and I missed my opportunity. When I failed to get into college, my parents refused to let me prepare for the exam again. I tried finding work with just my high school diploma, but no company would hire me, not even as a server, because they required at least a junior college diploma. My parents, despite being well off, refused to give me any financial support, reasoning that I wasn't studying anymore. I could barely make ends meet by working as a nanny. When I was at my lowest, my parents threw me out of the house, saying my job as a nanny was disgraceful and I was unworthy to be their daughter. Crying, I ran into Daphne near a lake. She coldly told me I didn't deserve to be part of the family, and that I was destined to be a lower-class person. At that moment, I still didn't understand why she hated me so much, considering we were supposed to be sisters. As she pushed me into the water, Daphne revealed the truth. I wasn't their biological child, but an abandoned baby they had found in front of the house. They only took me in because I came with a large sum of money in checks. Daphne's father had used that money to start a small business, which eventually made him wealthy. Despite this, he never treated me like his own daughter. I finally understood why I had been forced to do all the housework growing up, while Daphne got to attend talent training sessions. Even though my dance teacher said I was more talented than Daphne, my parents didn't let me pursue it. Instead, they spent a lot of money on Daphne's training. Although my grades were always excellent, my parents never praised me. But when Daphne's grades improved just a little, they would celebrate by taking her out for a nice meal. It was clear now that they only treated Daphne this way because she was their real daughter, while I was just someone they had taken in. The love I had craved my entire life was nothing but an illusion. If I had another chance, I would never seek their love again. Nor would I allow Daphne to stop me from taking my college entrance exam. I sat up in bed, placing a teddy bear roughly my height next to me. It was late, and Daphne, her mother, and her father were already asleep. I quietly slipped out of my room, put on some shoes I usually didn't wear, and left a different pair at the entrance to fool anyone who might check. I snuck out and booked a hotel near the exam site for 2 nights, with the only 200 yen I had. This time, I would take the exam, and no one could stop me. The next day, I successfully completed the exam, confident I would get into a prestigious university. I had managed to evade Daphne's parents the previous night, but I knew I couldn't escape them again. After returning to the hotel, I received a call from Daphne's mother, Lily. "It's the National College Entrance Exam today. Where are you? Get back home right now. Do you know how worried I am?" Lily's sharp voice rang through the phone. I silently scoffed. She wasn't worried about me missing the exam. She was afraid I would outshine Daphne if I took it. There was still one more day of the exam left, so I hung up on her, not wanting to deal with her. Both Daphne's mother and father called me dozens of times after that, but I ignored them. Soon, angry text messages started flooding my phone. They had called me more times that night than in my entire 18 years of life. Even though I had been reborn, a dull ache still lingered in my heart. At least now I knew I wasn't their biological daughter. The next day, I gave my all in the exam again. Walking out of the exam venue, I felt an unexplainable sense of relief. After the exam, I made up my mind to return to Daphne's house to gather my things and leave. It was summer break, and I could find work to support myself. I wouldn't let Daphne's family ruin my life anymore. As expected, the moment I stepped back into the house, Daphne's mother flew into a rage. She slapped me the instant she saw me. "You brat! You don't listen to your mother now? How dare you stay out all night during the college entrance exam?" I looked at her coldly, but calmly replied, "I stayed in a hotel near the exam venue for convenience." At that moment, Daphne, who had been watching with satisfaction as her mother scolded me, couldn't contain her shock. "What? You actually took the exam?" she shouted. Daphne never wanted me to surpass her. It had always been humiliating for her that my grades were better than hers. And now she had tried to stop me from taking the exam just to maintain that edge. "Yes, Daphne, are you disappointed?" I said, smiling slightly through the pain of the slap. Daphne paused, taken aback. "Of course not," she said, but then added with venom in her voice, "How could you defy your parents and stay out alone? Are you seeing some strange man?" At that moment, Daphne's father slammed the table. "Lily, you shameless girl! At your age, how dare you stay out all night? You're not a part of this family anymore. And as for the exam, I don't think you should go to college at all." Just as I predicted, Daphne's mother nodded in agreement. "You shouldn't go to college. Daphne is the one who's meant for higher education. In a few days, you can pack up and find a job. I don't want to see you here anymore." With a sneer, I responded, "I was never really your daughter in the first place, was I? All you ever wanted was to keep me from going to college. Mom, let me ask you this. If we're both your daughters, why do you treat me so differently from Daphne?" I scanned Daphne's mother with a sharp look, and she averted her gaze awkwardly. "What if I insist on attending this college?" I asked. Daphne's father angrily tossed the glass he was holding onto the floor, causing it to shatter with a sharp sound. He probably expected me, the always obedient adopted daughter, to give in as I usually did when they were angry. Unfortunately for them, this time they were wrong. Unlike before, when I'd nervously tried to win their forgiveness, I simply smiled and said, "Fine." This only made Daphne's father angrier. "Get out!" he yelled. I went to my room, grabbed my backpack, and left the Daphne household without looking back. Even though Daphne was upset that I had taken the college entrance exam, she smirked as I was kicked out. "Sister," she said with mock sympathy, "if you beg Dad for forgiveness, maybe you won't have to leave." I looked at her smug face and chuckled. "Instead of worrying about me, you should focus on your own exam results." Furious, Daphne pointed at me. "Get out, Lily! You don't deserve to be part of the Daphne family." "As if I wanted to stay," I muttered, walking away. After leaving their home, I managed to get a job at a bookstore. I had worked part-time in bookstores during school vacations, so I was familiar with the boss, who felt sorry for me after hearing my story. He even paid me half a month's salary in advance and helped me find a place to stay. Grateful, I worked even harder. To my surprise, I ran into Julian, the top student and academic god from our class at the bookstore. Julian was someone Daphne had always admired from afar, but he had been my seatmate. She had always thought something might develop between Julian and me, and it was another reason she had tried to stop me from taking the exam. She feared that I might end up at the same university as him. But the truth was, although we sat together in class, Julian and I barely knew each other. "How did your exam go?" Julian asked, breaking his usual cold demeanor. I was surprised by his question. "It was fine. How about you?" He smiled confidently. "No problem. I'll be heading to Harvard." Hearing that, I looked down, feeling a bit disheartened. That's amazing. I'd love to go to Harvard too. In my previous life, I never had the chance to even take the college entrance exam. And now, though I'd finally taken it, I wasn't sure if I'd make it to Harvard. "You will," Julian said with certainty, his eyes gleaming with confidence as he looked at me. I was taken aback, unsure of where his belief in me was coming from. "Believe in yourself," he said, patting my head before returning to his task of organizing books. My face turned red instantly. I'd never had a boy touch my head like that before. Julian was the heartthrob of our school, admired by many girls, yet he'd always remained distant and cold. Could it be that he liked me? But I quickly dismissed that thought. He was probably just being friendly because I was his seatmate, I reasoned. As days passed, Julian and I grew more familiar with each other, even joking around occasionally. As the results of the exam approached, I became increasingly anxious. Julian assured me that, based on my usual performance, I had nothing to worry about, while I knew that in my heart, the painful memory of being barred from taking the exam in my past life still haunted me. "Lily, you seem different lately," Julian remarked, studying me with a serious expression. My heart skipped a beat. Had he somehow figured out my secret? I brushed off his comment with a casual response, and he didn't press further. The night the results were to be released, I was lost in thought while walking back to my rented apartment and accidentally bumped into a well-dressed man. "Careful, young lady," he said kindly, helping me steady myself. "You don't want to fall." His voice was gentle, and he had the manner of a true gentleman. I smiled and thanked him. "Sorry, uncle, I'll be more careful." The man looked at me in shock. "Mia, is that you?" he asked, gripping my shoulders excitedly. "No, you must be mistaken," I replied, startled by his sudden intensity. "I'm not Mia." But he continued to stare at me, murmuring to himself. "You're right, Mia is gone." He sighed, disappointment crossing his face. Then he seemed to brighten again. "No, you must be Mia's daughter. You look just like her. Would you be willing to take a paternity test?" Though I didn't know who Mia was. I wasn't the biological daughter of Daphne's parents, and a part of me hoped to find my real family. I agreed. The results of the test came in, and to my surprise, I really was the man's daughter. He hugged me tightly, tears of joy streaming down his face. His name was Edward, and Mia had been my mother. He told me that she had left him in a moment of anger, pregnant with me. After being diagnosed with cancer and mistakenly believing Edward had moved on, she left me with a large sum of money, hoping someone would care for me. Unfortunately, That led me to the cold and cruel Daphne family. When I recounted my years with the Daphnes and how they had mistreated me, even trying to stop me from taking the exam, Edward clenched his fists in anger. "That family deserves to pay for what they did to you," he growled. As the head of a large company, it would have been easy for him to crush the Daphne family's business, but I stopped him. "Dad, I'll make sure they pay in my own way." Despite the sadness of losing my mother, I was overjoyed to have found my father. That same day, we checked my college entrance exam results together, and I had scored high enough to easily surpass Harvard's admission threshold. Overjoyed, my father insisted on throwing a grand party to celebrate both our reunion and my success. I posted a screenshot of my results on social media with the caption, "Ready to dine at Harvard's cafeteria." Not long after, Julian messaged to congratulate me. He was the top scorer in our province, and we even made plans to eat together at Harvard in the future. Almost simultaneously, I received an angry voice message from Daphne. "Impossible. You're not going to Harvard. Mom and Dad will never let you." I couldn't help but laugh. "You can't decide where I go to college, Daphne," I replied. Then blocked her and ignored the flood of messages that followed. I moved in with my dad, officially changing my last name to Juliet and leaving my old identity behind. My once restless heart was finally at peace, and even my personality became more lively. I filled out Harvard as my top choice. When the official admissions were announced, Julian called me, his voice trembling slightly. Juliet. We're both going to Harvard," he said. I thanked the universe for giving me a second chance to find my father, take the exam, and pursue my dreams. "Lily," Julian spoke again, his voice soft and serious. "I want to spend all 4 years of college by your side. Is that okay?" His words caught me off guard, leaving me momentarily speechless. "Of course," I finally replied, smiling. "We're friends after all." Julian ended the call, clearly embarrassed and slightly irritated. Once he hung up, I finally realized that his words had been a confession. The thought that the most admired guy in school, the one all the girls liked, had feelings for me left me in shock. We had only recently started interacting more, even though we had been desk mates for 2 years. After we split into different streams for liberal arts and science, we barely spoke. I couldn't understand why he liked me, but thinking about Julian's handsome face and the way his long eyelashes fluttered when he looked down made me blush. That evening, Dad had planned my college entrance banquet. He told me that he wanted to announce to the entire city that he had found his long-lost daughter and wanted everyone to know how precious I was to him. He even invited my adoptive parents and Daphne, saying he wanted them to see just who they had mistreated. I wore the couture dress Dad had bought for me, and he hired a makeup artist to make sure I looked my best. Growing up in the Daphne household, whenever I made an effort to look nice, Daphne's mother would scold me, accusing me of trying to attract attention. Meanwhile, no matter how much Daphne dressed up, her mother would always praise her, beaming with pride. "My daughter looks so beautiful." Now, being free from the Daphnes, I didn't have to suppress myself anymore. Daphne's parents owned a small business, and when they received the invitation from the Juliet family, they were ecstatic. They probably thought this was their chance to latch onto a wealthy family and raise their own status. "Daphne, I heard Edward's daughter has been found, and she's been accepted into Harvard University," Daphne's mother whispered eagerly. You should get close to Miss Juliet. She spoke like a typical opportunist, always looking for a way to climb the social ladder. Meanwhile, Daphne's father strutted around mingling with various business figures, clearly thrilled by the opportunity. I watched from a distance, calm yet distant. As I approached them in my elegant couture dress, Daphne caught sight of me and exclaimed, "Lily, what are you doing here?" Her eyes sparkled with jealousy when she saw my expensive outfit. "You've been kicked out by Mom and Dad, and now you're wearing such a fancy dress. Have you become some old man's mistress for money?" Her voice was intentionally loud, designed for everyone to hear. Right on cue, Daphne's mother chimed in. "Lily, how could you disgrace yourself like this? You really are ungrateful." They hurled insults, but I simply smiled. "I'm not Lily anymore. From today, I'm Juliet." At that moment, my dad stepped forward, his expression serious. "I'd like to see who dares to call my daughter ungrateful." The sight of my father caused Daphne's father to tremble. "Edward, are you saying this? This disgraceful girl is your daughter?" Daphne's parents and Daphne herself were stunned. They chorused in disbelief. "How can that be?" Dad wrapped his arm protectively around me and gazed down at them. "Why can't it be? Lily is my daughter. Don't pretend you don't know what you've done. You picked her up on the side of the road. You stole the money Mia left for her. And you abused her in every way possible. Don't think I'm unaware of any of this." Daphne, trying to hold on to her disbelief, shouted, "This is a lie! Lily, you hired someone to act this out. There's no way this man is your real father." Amidst their disbelief, Dad led me onto the stage, his face glowing with pride. He announced to the entire crowd, "My long-lost daughter, Lily, has been found. From now on, Juliet is the only daughter of the Juliet family. If anyone dares to mistreat her, they will have to answer to me." As he spoke, he shot a fierce look at Daphne's family, and I could see the fear in their eyes. Turning back to me, Dad's expression softened with affection. "And not only has our Lily come back, but she's also been accepted into Harvard University." Dad began leading me around, introducing me to everyone. As I mingled with the guests, I could feel Daphne's jealous gaze following me. Suddenly, Daphne's father, clearly shaken by Dad's earlier threat, shamelessly approached. "Edward," he started, his tone fawning, "I've made a mistake. I didn't know Lily was your daughter. She's always been such a sensible girl, more thoughtful than Daphne." It was the first time I had ever heard him speak well of me. But Dad wasn't having it. His eyes turned cold as he responded, "Is it that you didn't need to worry about her, or that you didn't care at all? You never treated Lily as part of your family. She worked like a servant in your house, was denied basic opportunities, and you even tried to stop her from taking the National College entrance exam." As Dad shielded me standing tall and firm, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. "Let me make this clear," Dad declared loudly for all to hear. "If any company dares to collaborate with the Daphne Group, the Juliet Group will sever all ties with them." His words caused a stir among the attendees. The Juliet family held a lot of influence in the business world, and nobody wanted to be on their bad side. Daphne's father's face paled as he stammered, "But I raised Lily. I may not have given birth to her, but I took care of her for so many years. Surely that counts for something." Then he turned to me, pleading silently, "Dad, aren't you going to say something on my behalf?" I smirked, thinking about all the chores I'd done for them over the years. "Why don't you check if the amount you spent on me even covers the cost of hiring a maid for 10 years? Upon hearing this, Daphne's mother immediately looked displeased. Lily, how can you talk like that? You were willing to help out, and we did spend money on you. Since you're so ungrateful now, maybe you should ask your wealthy father to repay us for raising you. Daphne, sensing an opportunity, jumped in excitedly. Yes! Pay us back! At least 5 million yuan. Hearing the number, Daphne's mother's eyes sparkled with greed. Only 5 million yuan, Edward. You're a big shot. Surely you can afford that. Daphne's father, however, looked grim upon hearing these greedy demands. Enough, he said, clearly worried. What if Edward really cuts us off? Ignoring him, Daphne's mother jabbed her finger toward me and continued shouting, You little... Pay back everything you owe us. You've eaten our food and lived under our roof for years. Give it all back now. I slapped her hand away firmly, sneered, and then pulled out my phone. I've kept a record of everything you spent on me over the years. While you poured millions into Daphne, you barely spent 200,000 yuan on me. In fact, my biological mother left me a check for 500,000 yuan. Not only did you get rich off that money, but even if we assume you spent 200,000 yuan on me, shouldn't you return the remaining 300,000? Their faces twisted as they heard my words. What are you talking about? I don't know anything about a 500,000 yuan check. Daphne's mother shouted, trying to appear angry but clearly shaken. It was obvious I had struck a nerve. The idea of having to return money was more unbearable to her than losing face. I smiled coldly and replied, You don't know. Then just ask the bank to verify it. Let's see who cashed that check back then. At that moment, the expressions of the entire Daphne family changed. The nearby guests began to murmur among themselves. The Daphne family is so shameless. They took Miss Juliet's money and treated her like a servant. Yes, they're awful. Good thing she was reunited with her real father, Edward. Who knows what might have happened otherwise? We definitely can't do business with them anymore. As the whispers grew, Daphne's father suddenly dropped to his knees in front of my dad. Edward, please, let us be. We'll return the 500,000 yuan to you. Just please don't ruin our business. We're only running a small company. His eyes filled with panic as he pleaded. At that moment, Daphne stepped forward, glaring at me. Lily, after all Dad did for you, how could you embarrass him like this? He didn't raise me, he raised you. I shot back, my voice cold. And if you feel humiliated, maybe you should leave. Daphne's mother, hearing this, lost control. Her face contorted in fury as she charged at me, hand raised to strike. I remembered all too well how she had slapped me before, right after I had taken the National College entrance exam. But this time, I was prepared. I caught her hand in midair and slapped her back instead. Sorry, but I'm not the same Lily you used to boss around. Now I'm Juliet. Security quickly stepped in, hauling the 3 members of the Daphne family away, despite their protests. As Daphne's mother and father screamed and Daphne hurled insults at me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. My father came up beside me, gently resting his hand on my head. Juliet, you've gone through so much over the years, but now that I'm here, you'll never have to suffer again. Thank you, Dad. I smiled, feeling truly happy. I had not only gotten into Harvard University, but I had also found my real father. Over the next few days, I heard that the Daphne Group was on the verge of bankruptcy, with many of its shareholders pulling out. I knew my dad had a hand in that, and I couldn't help but think they deserved it. Meanwhile, Julianne, who had somehow learned I was from the Juliet family, suddenly became distant. He never brought up the confession he had made earlier, and even started avoiding me, though I hadn't decided if I wanted to be with him. We were still friends, and I didn't understand why he was acting this way. One day, I stopped him on the street and confronted him. "Julian, why have you been avoiding me lately?" Julian glanced at me and hesitated. His eyes were full of mixed emotions. "Lily, no, Juliet. Please just forget what I said before." I was baffled by his sudden change in behavior. Although I had feelings for Julianne, I wasn't head over heels for him. Still, since he had said that, I decided to let it go. As he walked away, his figure seemed strangely lonely. My father, always generous, had given me a considerable allowance to enjoy my summer vacation. One evening, I left the mall and felt the warm air, deciding to grab a drink from a nearby milk tea shop. To my surprise, Julian was behind the counter, working there. It turned out that, in addition to his job at the bookstore, he was also working part-time at the milk tea shop. He was so hard-working. A suspicion crept into my mind, but I didn't approach him. Instead, I went to the Starbucks across the street and watched as he finished his shift. I followed him from a distance as he made his way to a quiet, run-down neighborhood. Unlike the bright city streets, this area was lined with modest homes. I saw him approach an older woman who was sorting through garbage. It was his grandmother. Only then did I realize how difficult Julian's family life must have been. I was about to slip away when I accidentally stepped on a bottle. Julian turned and saw me immediately. "Juliet!" He called my name, pulling me into the allée. He looked at me intently, his voice low. "Did you see all of that?" I hesitated before nodding. Julian sighed deeply, his expression heavy with a maturity far beyond his years. "I suppose you're wondering why I've been avoiding you. The truth is, I really liked you from the moment we became deskmates. You were so sweet, and no other girl ever caught my eye like you did. Your determination and positive outlook inspired me, and I admired you. But I knew we were young, and I figured you wouldn't be interested in dating before the exams. So I held off on saying anything." His gaze softened as he continued. "But after the exams, I found out you were the daughter of the Juliet family. I didn't want you to know about my family's struggles. I didn't want you to think I was trying to get close to you for your status or money. That's why I kept my distance, so that was why Julian had pulled away. It was because of his family's financial difficulties. Seeing him, usually so confident and full of life, looking so defeated, I felt a surge of emotion rise within me. I stood on my toes and kissed Julian on the lips, leaving him completely shocked. His face instantly flushed red. I quickly covered his mouth with my hand and smiled, saying, "Julian, from now on, you're my boyfriend. I have high hopes for you. With your excellent grades, you're sure to give me a bright future." Tears welled up in Julian's eyes, and I could see the affection and gratitude in them. He hugged me tightly, as if he never wanted to let go. I smiled to myself, feeling a warmth inside. I was with Julian, and that brought me happiness. But before I could enjoy that happiness for too long, Daphne barged in, furious. "Lily, tell your rich father to stop going after my family. If you don't, I'll spread rumors that you're using your power to bully others." Her face was twisted in anger as she slammed her fist on the table. I responded calmly, "Go ahead and say whatever you want." Daphne sneered. You must feel so smug right now, getting into Harvard and finding a rich father. But don't get too full of yourself. The guy I like got into Harvard too, and he'll definitely outshine you." Her voice was filled with both bitterness and arrogance. I knew the guy she was talking about, Julian. She had secretly admired him for 3 years and confessed her feelings countless times, only to be rejected. "Isn't the guy you like Julian?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Daphne's face lit up with pride. "Yes!" "Are you scared now? Julian is the top student at our school. And once he gets to university, he'll definitely surpass you." She boasted about Julian, her confidence growing with every word. "Just wait and see. I'm beautiful, and now that we've graduated, he'll finally accept me." "Well, good luck with that," I said, barely able to hold back a laugh. At that moment, Julian entered the room. Daphne's eyes sparkled as she rushed toward him, excited. "Julian! How did you know I was here? Did you come to find me?" She reached for his hand, but he avoided her. Instead, Julian walked straight over to me, looking at me lovingly. "Lily, I came to take you home." I smiled back at him, and when Daphne heard this, she was stunned. "Are you two together?" she asked in disbelief. "Isn't it obvious?" I replied with a grin. Daphne's jealousy was palpable as she screamed, "Lily, how dare you steal my boyfriend!" She lunged at me, but Julian quickly grabbed her arm and pushed her away. "I've never liked you, Daphne," he said coldly. "Please stop bothering me and my girlfriend." Julian took my hand, and under Daphne's furious gaze, we walked away together. 3 months later, Julian and I both started at Harvard University. When my dad found out we were dating, he wasn't pleased. He didn't want the daughter he had finally found to be stolen by some young man. After Daphne's family went bankrupt, her parents couldn't even find work, and she couldn't afford the steep tuition fees for art school. It was partly because I performed so well on the national college entrance exam that she didn't get into her dream school this time. In this new life, I was surrounded by love, while my cruel adoptive parents and sister got the punishment they deserved. I avoided the mistakes of my past life and earned a fresh start. The last memory I had of my previous life was when James Canary, who had gained weight, showed up to demand official recognition of his relationship with me. It was 3 years into our marriage, and until that point, James had been a doting husband, admired by all. But that day, his tenderness was reserved for someone else. "Mia, we need to talk about the divorce," he said. I was caught off guard and asked, "Why?" His face showed irritation. "Emma is going to have my baby, and she deserves proper status." I couldn't help but laugh. "Isn't being a mistress good enough for her?" I retorted. James sighed with disappointment. "How can you say something so cruel about a young girl?" he said, as though I had become heartless. Young girl, I thought. James used to call me that sweetly when we were in love. We had spent 5 years dating and 3 years married, with barely any arguments. Everyone around us believed our relationship was unshakable. But when had James' feelings changed? Months ago? 3 years ago? Or maybe even earlier, when he still called me baby and held me close? Was it me he was thinking of? Or was it Emma? I didn't want to know. When love turns sour, you throw it away. When a man turns rotten, it's no different. I agreed to the divorce, but only if James left with nothing. On the day we went to settle things, I saw a stack of gift contracts in the property division paperwork. The donor's name was William, but I couldn't recall who he was. It wasn't until my car was hit by a truck and I was on the verge of death that I vaguely remembered. William, the brilliant head of the William Group, who had taken his own life on the day I married James. He was forever frozen in time at 28. At the wedding, as congratulations for James and Emma poured in, I still felt the crushing weight of that accident. The guests handed red envelopes to James congratulating him on his marriage to Emma. No one knew I had been the original bride. Emma stood beside him in a white dress, and I, in my vintage gown, seemed out of place. "Sister Mia, I'm sorry for taking the spotlight. Should I change?" Emma had said, pretending to be apologetic. James chuckled, "No need. You look great. Mia won't mind." It was all too familiar, just like in my past life. Back then, I had thought it was a trivial moment. But now I knew they had been together even then, or maybe earlier. I raised my hand and slapped James across the face. His expression changed as he asked, "Mia, what are you doing?" I pointed at him and Emma. "You two make me sick. If you want to get married, go ahead." I turned and went to change out of my wedding dress. James followed, irritated. "The guests are waiting. We have 20 minutes until the ceremony. What are you doing?" he demanded. All I could think of was how there might still be enough time. In my past life, the report on William's suicide said it had happened right after James and I exchanged rings. That night, I received the gift contracts and love letters. I didn't fully understand it then, but between a life and a cheating husband, I knew what was more valuable. I shoved James aside and said, "Your mistress has shown her true colors. Don't bother hiding your dirty intentions anymore." James, furious that I'd hit the mark, spat. "I've been too lenient with you, Mia. Listen carefully. If you leave now, I'll never marry you again." If I hadn't been given this second chance, his threat might have worked on me. I had loved him so deeply before. But love isn't everything, and impure love is worth nothing. I grabbed the lighter the makeup artist had left behind and set my wedding dress on fire in front of him. "You and Emma deserve each other. Go ahead and be together forever." As the dress burned to ashes, James could only watch in disbelief. I sneezed and turned to leave. On my way to courtyard number 1 in a taxi, the stack of gift agreements with William's name on them kept coming to mind. It was a thick pile, containing all of his assets. With such a vast fortune, he had given it to me, and without hesitation ended his life. A madman. As I pondered this, the taxi pulled up to courtyard number 1, a renowned villa area for the wealthy, known for its strict security. I was stopped at the gate, just about to ask the security guard to make a call, when William's assistant arrived to escort me in. Upon entering, I saw William seated on the sofa, dressed in a black shirt and trousers, his hair neatly combed. His side profile appeared cold and stern, and his lips were slightly pursed. On the large screen before him, the live broadcast of my wedding with James played. William seemed deep in thought, murmuring, "She must be very beautiful in a wedding dress, right?" His words were directed at his assistant, but I answered instead, saying, "You won't get to see it." William turned toward me sharply. I smiled and added, "I ran away from the wedding." His pupils dilated slightly, and he stood up in surprise, walking toward me. He raised his hand as if to embrace me, but ultimately just clenched his fingers, letting them hang helplessly by his side. He opened his mouth several times before finally asking, "Why are you here?" I replied, "I came to save a life. It has nothing to do with love." just a fear of losing life. I noticed a bottle of sleeping pills on the side table and asked, "If I hadn't come, would you have taken those?" William grew visibly uneasy, like a child caught doing something wrong. It was almost amusing. Everyone had said that the head of the William family was decisive and firm, but I didn't expect him to come across as somewhat endearing. I motioned for him to respond. William licked his lower lip and said, "Since you're here, I won't take them." I flushed the pills down the toilet, and William followed me closely, his gaze so intense that it almost seemed like he wanted to melt me with it. Anyone observing would certainly believe he was deeply in love with me, but I didn't understand why. Having just gone through James's betrayal in 2 lifetimes, I wasn't in the mood to dwell on such things. However, William's assistant spoke up. "Your company has worked with the William Group a lot. At one of the celebratory banquets, you were so drunk that you ended up toasting William and falling into his arms." Yes, I remembered that event. I had been blacked out afterward, and my memory wasn't clear, but now, hearing it, I wondered, was William so infatuated just because of that? His feelings seemed to develop too easily. I glanced at him, but my attention was drawn to the image of James and Emma on the screen. I walked away decisively. Knowing the wedding couldn't continue, James dismissed the guests with a scowl, and Emma, standing beside him, insulted me at every opportunity. James didn't defend me once. This was the man I had loved for 5 years. Suddenly, the screen went black. William set the remote down and handed me a White Rabbit toffee. "It's your favorite. Eat it, and you won't be sad anymore." I froze for a moment, tears welling in my eyes. I used to love toffee, and whenever James traveled, he would always bring me a large bag. I used to tell him I could buy it at the supermarket downstairs, but he insisted that the ones from different places tasted different, and that he wanted me to try White Rabbit toffees from all over the world. But now he had already forgotten his promise. The man who used to sweeten me with candies had completely changed. I cried so hard it felt like I could hardly breathe. William panicked, and in his clumsy attempt to comfort me, he awkwardly peeled the candy wrapper and said, "You said eating candy would make you happy. Don't cry." He stuffed the candy into my mouth, and the sweetness slowly spread across my tongue. Gradually, my tears stopped. I found myself feeling embarrassed. I wasn't very familiar with William, and crying in front of him felt awkward. Holding the candies, I stood up and said, "If you don't have anything else, I'll go." William gave a soft and pursed his lips, looking pitiful, like a puppy abandoned by its owner, silently showing his reluctance to let me go. I was almost tempted to ruffle his hair, but I stopped myself. The assistant saw me out and asked, "Miss Mia, when will you come again?" I was puzzled and replied, "Huh?" The assistant pleaded, "It may sound absurd, but you're really the most important person to William. He's usually so quiet and keeps everything inside. You saw those sleeping pills. If you hadn't come, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Forgive my rudeness, but could you spend more time with him?" I felt torn. I had my own life, and after the troubles following my wedding, things kept piling up. By the time I finished sorting everything out, a week had passed. I didn't get home until late one night, only to find William standing at the door, dressed in black. His long windbreaker made him look even taller. He must have been waiting for a while. As soon as he saw me, his dark eyes lit up, and he said, "You're back." I asked him what he wanted. He took a little kitten from his pocket, pure white and fluffy. My eyes brightened, and I said, How cute. He placed the kitten in my hands and said, I heard that pets can heal people. Let it accompany you. I was a bit surprised and asked, for me? William nodded and added, it's already had its vaccinations. I'll bring the other supplies tomorrow. The little kitten mewed in my palm, and I nodded absently. William pulled out his phone and said, let's exchange contact info. I looked at him for a moment, wondering if he was using the cat to flirt with me. William quickly became nervous and explained, I've never raised a pet before, and I'm not sure if I bought everything. I added him on WeChat. William then stroked my profile picture, and his cold and stern features suddenly softened. Was he that happy just because we added each other on WeChat? I had the urge to ruffle his hair again. But before I could, William hurriedly found an excuse to leave, almost as if he feared I might change my mind. 2 hours later, my phone vibrated. He had sent several pictures, asking me what else was missing for the cat's supplies. I looked through them and saw that everything seemed to be in order. William then sent 2 more pictures, 2 sets of clothes, and asked, which set should I wear to meet you tomorrow? I had only seen him in black so far, so I replied, the black set. The next day, William arrived early, wearing a windbreaker and casual pants. It wasn't the black shirt and windbreaker I had mentioned. I casually asked, why didn't you wear that set? William seemed shy and said, I'll save the nice one for next time. I raised my eyebrows and William quickly turned his face away, his ears turning slightly red. The little kitten became the connection between me and William. And while we appeared disconnected, our interactions slowly increased. In just 2 months, the kitten had grown into a young cat, thanks to our care. Perhaps just as William said, pets can heal people. As the more I cared for the kitten, the less I thought about James. Yet I hadn't anticipated that James would reappear. He was clearly angry, asking why I had blocked him. I sneered and replied, or should I keep you around for the spring festival? After the wedding debacle, James had gone on a business trip with Emma, leaving me to handle all the aftermath. His friends had urged him to return, but he insisted it was all my fault, and I should clean up the mess. When his friends asked him if he wasn't worried that I might retaliate, he confidently stated, we've been together for 5 years. Everyone knows no one else would want her but me. This is a lesson for her, and once she realizes her mistake, we'll have the wedding again. His tone was condescending, as though I had been the one chasing after him, a desperate flatterer. No matter how poorly he treated me, it seemed as though I couldn't live without him. However, I had always been able to love freely and also able to let go. So, as his friend suggested, I dealt with him, this worthless man. James must have realized that I had blocked him when he demanded that I admit my fault. His anger flared. Mia, I'll give you one more chance. Take me off the blacklist. I smiled and said, get lost. James's face darkened as he grabbed my shoulder with one hand, saying, don't be shameless when I'm trying to be nice to you. I frowned in disgust and said, let go of me. James tightened his grip, seemingly driven by some kind of madness. Just then, the door opened and William walked in holding the cat, his gaze freezing. She told you to let her go, didn't you hear? James quickly left, unable to challenge William, not daring to face him. William took my hand and led me inside before gently wiping my shoulder with a wet tissue. The veins on the back of his hand stood out, but his movements on my shoulder were tender. I turned to look at him, and almost as if under a spell, asked, "Do you mind him touching me?" Without hesitation, William replied, "He's dirty." I was pleased with his response. He discarded the tissue, looking sullen. "He's not a good man, Mia. Don't look for someone like him in the future." I teasingly asked, "If I have to find someone, can't I choose you?" William froze for a moment. His cheeks flushed, but he didn't respond and just remained strangely quiet. After a long pause, he asked, "Mia, do you prefer having someone accompany you for a short time or for a lifetime?" He seemed unsure, as though waiting for my answer to guide him. After thinking for a moment, I replied, "If the love is deep enough, a short time can be more beautiful than a lifetime." William had changed. The company had taken on a new project in collaboration with the William Group. My supervisor asked me to oversee it, so I took the materials and went to William's company. To my surprise, the person I was to meet with was William. We were discussing the project in his office, and William was staring at me intently. Except for the time I stopped him from taking his life, I had never seen him look at me like this. His gaze was so intense and unmistakable that it seemed as if he wanted to consume me. Usually, when he looked at me, he was reserved, hiding his deep affection in his dark eyes, only showing a hint of it when his ears turned red. But since that question he asked me, it seemed as though he had suddenly let go of his reservations, and his feelings were now completely exposed. I felt a bit overwhelmed and said, "William, we're discussing work." His gaze dimmed, and with a tone of self-reproach, he apologized. "Sorry, did I distract you?" His pitiful expression made me want to tease him. He was the all-powerful CEO, yet he looked so vulnerable. I silently laughed to myself but replied, "Anyone would have trouble working when being looked at like that. It's just that I'm calm, but if it were someone else, they would have already acted." William asked with a hopeful expression, "Then do you want to act?" I couldn't help but smile and replied, "Act? To touch your abs?" A faint pink hue spread across William's ears. He pursed his lips, as if debating something, before standing up and slowly pulling his black shirt out of his pants with one hand, unbuttoning 2 buttons. "Mia, you can touch them," he said. I was stunned, an unexpected thrill rising in my chest. William was so obedient. How could he be both cute and flirtatious? He took a deep breath and leaned over, saying, "I work out every day. The feel is pretty good." Despite the hurt caused by James, William's looks were not a crime. Standing over 1.8 meters tall with 8-pack abs, William was undoubtedly attractive. His abs were as smooth as they were impressive, and I couldn't help but admire them. William, who was both shy and bold, blushed and asked, "Mia, are you tired? Do you want to touch my abs to relax?" Over the course of nearly 4 months, I almost wore a mole on William's abs from rubbing them so much. Of course, it didn't interfere with the work, and the project progressed smoothly. I received a solid promotion and salary increase, and my supervisor urged me to invite William to the celebration banquet to improve our company's reputation. For the 100,000 bonus, I tried to contact William, but he didn't respond. In the past 6 months, William had always been quick to reply, whether by phone or message, so this was unusual. Feeling uneasy, I called again, and this time his assistant answered, sounding on the verge of tears. "Miss Mia, please come to the hospital right away." Hospital? Did William take sleeping pills again? I rushed to the hospital, where the emergency room light was on, and the assistant was pacing anxiously in the hallway. "What's going on?" I asked. The assistant replied, "During the meeting, William suddenly coughed up blood and passed out." Before he could explain further, the emergency room door opened and the doctor came out looking furious. "The person is just a bit tired. There's nothing wrong with him. Don't waste medical resources for no reason." The assistant stood dumbfounded. But before he could say anything, William came out. He looked pale, as if recovering from a severe illness, not just tired. I rushed over to support him, saying, "Let's go to another hospital and get a full body checkup." William shook his head, replying, "I'm fine. Let's just go home." I was inexplicably angry and scolded him. "William, can't you take your health seriously? You look like you're dying." William was taken aback by my reprimand, then smiled, his grin as bright and charming as spring sunlight. He touched my head and said gently, "Mia, don't be angry. I know what's going on. I'll tell you when we get back, okay?" Unable to convince him otherwise, I took him home. As soon as we entered, he pushed me against the door and kissed me intensely. The new mouthwash he used had a cool mint flavor that made my mind go blank. I opened my eyes and he covered them with his hand, gently urging me to return his affection. When the kiss ended, I was panting for breath, and I heard him ask, "Mia, you like me, right?" My heart, racing in my chest, felt like it might burst. Liking William was natural. He was thoughtful and caring. He would give me a cat to heal my heart and buy me heating pads during my period. He was passionate and romantic, blushing when I touched his abs and sending me flowers, along with transferring money whenever I was happy, saying it was for buying cat food. Throughout our time together, I felt loved constantly, surrounded by his thoughtful care. It was hard not to be moved, though I didn't fear admitting it. Something about the situation made me uneasy. I looked at him without speaking, but William seemed certain of something and kissed me again, saying, "Mia, thank you for liking me." We lingered by the door for over 10 minutes, before finally making our way to the living room and sitting down. He held me close, continuously rubbing his face against my neck. Curious, I asked, "What's wrong with you, spitting blood?" William paused for a moment before setting me aside gently, like carrying a watermelon. He wiped his face and said, "Mia, do you believe in systems?" I was confused, and he continued, "Actually, I came with a system to love you." His unexpected confession made my face turn red, and I pretended to scold him. "Be serious." William looked aggrieved and replied, "It's true. I'm not lying to you." Looking into his eyes, I could tell he wasn't being dishonest. "Feeling surreal?" I asked. "And then?" William lowered his gaze, regret filling his words. "As long as you like me, the system can detect it. But my life will be threatened." I found it absurd and said, "So you're using your life as a price for my affection?" William nodded and smiled the next moment, replying, "You're so romantic." I thought, romantic? My foot? William must be out of his mind. There couldn't be such a ridiculous system. Despite my doubts, William gently rubbed my head and said regretfully, "I can only be with you for a while." The buzzing in my mind made it seem like something inside had shattered. So, that's what he meant by asking that question that day. William explained that the passing of his life was the exchange he made with the system. It wasn't the first time he'd spit blood. I didn't believe his nonsense and dragged him to get checked out. The results made my heart sink. He was fine. At least nothing showed up on medical tests. But his health was certainly deteriorating. I was at a loss for what to do. However, he reassured me, "Mia, don't feel pressured. All I want is for you to be happy. If liking me causes you pain, I'd rather not have your affection. I came to love you, and being able to win your affection is already a blessing I've earned over 7 lifetimes." I felt irritated and said, "What a terrible system. Let it come out and talk to me." William chuckled and said, "It's in my brain, like brainwaves. If you want to see it, just wait until I die and open my head." I was shocked by his calmness and called him a madman. William kissed my cheek and said, "But don't worry, Mia. There's good news." When I asked what it was, he kept me in suspense and wouldn't tell me. At that time, I didn't realize that the so-called good news was that after he disappeared, everyone would forget him, including me. William wouldn't let me treat him like a dying person, so I dragged him along to my promotion celebration banquet. He wore a suit, his cold and solemn demeanor standing in contrast to his natural grace. As he walked by, several young women from our company gathered together, excitedly discussing. Nobody told me the president of the William Group was so handsome. The employees at William Group must really have it good. I'll quit tomorrow and apply there. William walked past them without acknowledging them and came to me, speaking softly. "Mia," his voice gentle, completely different from his usual serious air. I wanted to ruffle his hair, and this time I actually did. William bent down to make it easier for me to do so. The girls watching were stunned, their jaws dropping. He took my hand and kissed the tip of my finger, asking happily, "Is Mia jealous?" Seizing the chance, I leaned in and rubbed against his lips, teasing, "William, you're so popular." William embraced me affectionately, saying, "I only like you." As I rested my head on his shoulder, I felt an overwhelming urge to cry. How wonderful it would be if he could stay by my side like this for the rest of the celebration. William stayed with me every step of the way. Our supervisor joked, "Has William taken a liking to our Mia?" William placed his arm around my waist and replied, "I've been waiting for Mia to take a liking to me for a long time." He humbled himself completely and showed me full respect. I was the center of attention at the celebration banquet, and William helped me avoid a lot of alcohol. His gaze on me had changed, becoming more intense than before. Under his intense stare, I felt parched and took 2 big gulps of champagne. He wiped the wine from my lips with his finger and said, "Mia, I want to go home." In this context, going home was self-explanatory. We went back to courtyard number 1, where William picked me up and kissed me all the way to the bedroom. This kiss was different from the previous ones. Perhaps the alcohol had stirred William's wild thoughts. He became dominant and forceful, blocking all my breath. I whimpered, but then he licked me softly, like a dog trying to please its owner. The room was dark, and the moonlight had disappeared behind the clouds. 10 minutes later, William's eyes were deep and dark as he asked, "Mia, is it okay?" Pressing against his abs, I shyly answered, He timidly asked, "Is it really okay that I can't be with you for too long?" My heart ached, and I bit his Adam's apple. He used to be restrained because he knew he couldn't stay with me forever. But even for a short while, I was willing to surrender to him. Strangely enough, I had been reborn before the wedding and had time to save him. He had been so sincere, giving me the courage to love again. I embraced him tightly. only to realize my neck was warm, and my eyes inexplicably became wet. I asked, "William, are you crying?" He kissed my collarbone, saying, "This time it's finally not too late. A 28-year-old man should not be underestimated." I didn't get up until the afternoon. William was in the study, having an online meeting. I walked over wearing his shirt, intending to tease him, but he picked me up and sat me on his lap. His voice was flat and cold, completely different from the charming tone he used when we were together. Somehow I felt happy, so I played with his Adam's apple and abs. William allowed me to do as I pleased. 3 minutes later, his voice was tense as he said, "Pause the meeting." I smirked and said, "William, you don't have much self-control?" The next second, I couldn't smile anymore. William jolted me and bit my ear, saying, "I've never had any self-control when it comes to you." He then turned on the microphone and said maliciously, "Continue the meeting." I felt like I was facing a formidable enemy and tried to get up and escape, but he held me tightly. During the 2-hour meeting, he intermittently paused and resumed. Eventually, I was so weak that he carried me out, and I swore I would never go to the study again. I suspected that William had a condition where he craved physical touch. We had been together for 6 months, and he always wanted to be close. I unconditionally indulged him, partly because of love, and partly because he didn't have much time left. Recently, the frequency of him spitting blood and fainting had increased. At first, I was panicked, but eventually I grew numb to it. Only in the quiet of the night when I looked at his sleeping face did I cry. It was as if he sensed it. He woke up and held me tightly, saying, "Mia, let's go traveling." He said he was tired and needed rest. He mentioned hearing about a particularly effective temple in the West. When you make a wish while spinning the prayer wheels, your wish would come true. He said he wanted to go there. We still have many more trips to take. Our journey to the West was planned, though we didn't head there immediately. Instead, we visited Dean City to see the flowers blooming in the winter, explored the crystal-clear waters and towering cities, and marveled at the stunning ice and snow world in Ben City. I took countless photos of William, who appeared genuinely happy, but then wept, saying, "Mia, let's be together in the next life, okay?" We embraced amid the swirling snowflakes, and I replied, "Okay, I will find you again in the next life." After he stopped crying, he smiled and said, "Let's go to the West tomorrow." I nodded, agreeing. "We'll leave in the morning." However, William broke his promise. On that sunny morning, with the sunlight reflecting off the snow, he didn't wake up. I thought he was just playing a joke and gently nudged him. "William, wake up or we'll miss the flight." But he didn't stir. I forced a smile and added, "William, if you don't wake up, I'll be angry." He feared making me angry in the past. Whenever I pouted, he'd do anything for me, even if it was impossible. Yet this time, he didn't respond. I shook him again and pleaded, "William, get up. You promised we would go to the West today. Please don't leave me alone." My voice cracked with emotion as I cried, but the person in the bed remained unresponsive. Just then, the phone rang. I answered it, and it was William's assistant who said, "Sister Mia, William asked me to call you and bring you home." I asked, confused, why? The assistant chuckled and explained, "William said he was dying, and the time of death was certain. Do you think he was so happy with you that he left you? It turned out that he had known for a long time when his time would come, but he had lied to me about it. I cursed him in my mind. The assistant soon arrived with a motorcade, and his mournful cries made the inevitable death feel even more real. I had to face the fact that William was gone. His funeral was not held, and after his cremation, his ashes were buried beneath a crab apple tree, a place that held significance as the site where we first met. I couldn't help but laugh, as I had never been to that tree before in my life. Why did he lie to me, even after his death? Later, the assistant brought me a stack of gift agreements, but I didn't look at them. Instead, I asked if he had brought the love letters. Surprised, the assistant replied, "How did you know?" After a moment, he produced a cardboard box filled with letters William had written to me. I had previously jokingly asked him about them, and his face had turned bright red, but he had always kept them hidden. I finally had the chance to read them. His letters were rather formal and disorganized, with some written entirely in classical Chinese. I laughed as I read them, wondering if he thought he was from ancient times, writing so elaborately. The assistant hesitated and then said, "Sister Mia, if you want to cry, don't hold it in. It's not good for your health." I was stunned. Why should I cry? William had always told me he liked seeing me smile and wanted me to be happy. I continued reading the letters late into the night. I didn't cry, but when I woke up, my eyes were swollen. The news on my phone reported that the William Group was now under the control of William's eldest son, with no mention of William himself. I felt something was wrong, so I searched for his name online, but found nothing. After I die, it will be as if I never existed. Mia can forget me, but remember our promise for the next life. Those were the last words William had said to me before bed, and they hit me hard. I immediately called his assistant to ask if William had left any other instructions. The assistant, confused, asked, "Who is William?" It felt as if the world had frozen over, and I ran back to the bedroom in a frenzy. I had placed the love letters by my pillow as proof of William's existence. But when I looked, they were gone. I opened the camera app, and all the hundreds of photos I had taken of him had disappeared as well. A cold wave rushed over me, and I rushed outside, asking anyone I met if they knew William. They didn't. I even called James, but he didn't know either. No one had ever heard of him. It was as if William had vanished entirely, just as he had warned me. He left behind nothing except a stack of gift agreements. This year felt like a long, unreal dream. William had clearly existed, yet now it seemed as if he had never been. I went to the crab apple tree and dug into the ground with my bare hands, but there was nothing. I froze in place, unable to distinguish reality from illusion. A sharp pain surged in my chest, and I collapsed under the tree. When I regained consciousness, it was evening, and the setting sun painted the sky in hues of gold. William and I had once watched such a sunset together. I called out his name, but when I looked around, he wasn't there. A deep sense of loss washed over me, but then suddenly I heard a crackling sound in my mind, followed by a mechanical voice. "Hello, I'm 008? At first, I was skeptical about the system William had mentioned, but now I knew for certain that 008 was his system, the only tangible proof of his existence. I immediately asked, "Where is he?" The system's voice crackled as it answered, "He's gone." I shouted, "No, you must have a way. If you brought him to me once, you can do it again." The system responded, "This is the 7th time he has come to love you. I fell silent. So, the talk about 7 lifetimes was not a joke. I asked the question that had been on my mind. Why did he love me? A memory card appeared in my hand, and the system said, "The answer is inside." I went home, inserted the card into my computer, and watched a video of the past that belonged to William and me. We had been dressed in magnificent clothes, visiting palaces like those from the movies. He was a hostage prince from an enemy kingdom, and I was a princess. On an ordinary night, I had been playing the zither beneath the crab apple tree when he had first watched me from behind it. That was when we met. Our love had remained unspoken due to the conflict between our countries. He had been brave and kind, bringing peace for 100 years. But he died during the spring when the crab apples bloomed by the Naya Bridge. He prayed for the well-being of all living things, but resisted reincarnation for a long time. That's when the system had found him. It promised to help him find me. And so he began reincarnating, preserving his memories across 6 lifetimes. But each time, he arrived too late. Either I was married or had children. He silently watched over me until I passed away. And then he ended his own life. The closest he had come was in my past life. But by then, I was with James. He had asked, in desperation, if next time he could come sooner. The system had shown some sympathy, saying, "It will cost you a great price." With tears in his eyes, he agreed, "But I can love her openly." He paid the price by ending his life early, allowing him to love me in this lifetime. This time, it wasn't too late. But he could only stay with me for a while. The video ended with a message from the system. It explained that I would have forgotten William, but it had forcibly retained my memories. Now, no one remembered him except for me. I asked, "How long can you stay with me?" I was afraid that one day I might forget, and I needed the system to remind me that someone had once gone to such lengths for me. The system replied, "Sorry, I'm being decommissioned. I will be recycled due to going against the wishes of the host and the main god." I was saddened, but still said goodbye. "Maybe we'll meet again if fate allows." The system seemed almost human when it responded. "I will remember to find you too." William still had a wish, left unfulfilled. I recalled it. He had wanted to go to the west. I simply nodded, and the system disappeared, just as William had. I continued to watch the video on the memory card repeatedly, feeling as though all my emotions had been drained. I was eerily calm. I asked professionals to manage the property William had left behind. Some of it was placed in a fixed deposit, some was used for financial products, and the rest went into a charitable foundation. Then I resigned from my job. My boss asked where I planned to go next, and I smiled softly, saying, "The West." I carefully booked my tickets and began my journey, looking no different from any other traveler. The scenery was beautiful, but I couldn't understand why it was. I thought of William again and found myself at the near bridge once more. A strange sense of tranquility washed over me. There, I sat by the crab apple tree and waited. But I did not find William. I closed my eyes. I wondered if this would be my 7th life. If the next time I saw him, we could be together for good. Perhaps in the next life, the journey will truly begin.